It's ticking all. Comment, bienvenue. Welcome one and all to another live stream. I must apologise for if my voice sounds a bit raspy. I've been a little bit suffering with the old lurgy, but I'm here to work with you to present to you a wonderful IPSA kind of magic. IPSA, the Independent Personal Search Association, currently chaired by Hamish. Hamish and I conspire to inform you, to delight you, and talk to you about everything IPSA related. Today is no different. We're talking about the case for better property data and the delays that ensue just because we don't have that yet. Hamish, would you care to colour that for me?
Well, speaking this week largely about property matters, because not only we have just I say property matters, they're always property matters. What we're actually sort of speaking about is either material or upfront information. People have different names for it, but here's a subject which came up sort of last week quite significantly in conversations because of various different reasons. We have the Law Society kicking the can down the road about what they're doing about material information. Various people sort of saying, well, we need to have 1,000 questions to make sure that every singular thing is identified. And there's so much of a controversy about the whole thing. And strangely enough, this goes back. It goes back to the start of the century. Here we are approaching nearly 25 years of struggling with the same dilemma. What do you do about getting that information? What information does somebody need to have before they buy a property? Now, originally, us sort of guys at IPSA, and along with my particular company as well, we were held to be, if you like, the experts. Because we use local people, we were suggested to be the experts purely for local authority searches, and that really was it. And that's more or less what was happening at the start of the century. But times have changed.
What gets me is I seem to remember now. I can't remember the name of it, and maybe you'll be able to furnish me with this. But recently there was a move. I mean, recently in the last few months, there was a move to add a bunch of extra questions for lawyers to pass on to prospective homeowners to fill in, and that went down like a bobby crush on an oil rig. I can't see how adding an extra hundreds of questions to things is actually going to make things go any smoother. If anything, I would have thought it'd create more delays.
Well, actually, in some respects, it does. And I think this is why this discussion is sort of quite important. There is never any sort of one single way that we can satisfy the required information for a transaction, for the transfer of property ownership, because different people, we all differ, different people buy different properties for different reasons. And if you multiply those 3 by 3 by 3, that's 27 different reasons that we've actually sort of got to start off with. But we can actually compound that even further when we actually start putting in other differentials. Is it a flat? Is it a shared ownership? Is it? There's just so much, and the complexities of it. I mean, it's worse. I don't know if any of you have tried this wondrous thing about putting the old bits of rice on a chessboard, and the first one you put on 1, and then you put on 2, then you put on 4. It's an exponential growth in terms of all of those questions. So you never ever you're going to get all of it. Because there's 2 things relating to that, and it's worth mentioning this, even though this is meant to be to do with IPSA, it is very much to do with IPSA now as well. What actually sort of happens, the information that gets given to the conveyancer has to be read by the conveyancer. So if you read your 1054 sort of as we're up to about 1,050. Is it 1,056? I can't remember when you're putting these bits of bits of rice on the old chessboard.
Well, it becomes millions by the end, by the last square.
It's not quite as dramatic as that. I need to take it back a bit. We only need to go through a couple of rows and we get the number of questions. However, the solicitor has to read through those. So what is right and what is wrong? Well, you can only come up with sort of so much to get people going. And it's a matter of doing that. And the British Standards Institute, not the British Standards Institute, but the British Standards people have come up and suggested to estate agents that certain information should be made available. Now, the great thing is what we've been able to do. We've partnered, and there'll be some great information coming through on this. We've partnered, and there's two possibilities here of different people we can work with, that we can actually provide both the material information along with local authority searches, along with environmental. Now that's a whole batch of everything anybody needs. They won't need any more information if they're going to buy a property, to be quite honest. And it will resolve all issues, because what happens, as has happened with the information that we do for the local authority searches, that's all we find by IPSA members. And we don't need to touch, in many respects, the material information, because of the way that the whole thing is actually sort of compiled. Now, what we are about, and always have been, is trying to take the pressure away from conveyancers, and particularly sort of the property lawyers there, who, if you like, are over-pressurised, and we're getting more pressurised now. People want to get into their properties before Christmas, and make it matters worse. Our government is still left on this big imposition coming through in March, that of course the amount that people can actually sort of save for their properties, and if you like, the land, not the land charges, I get confused with all of these things that are going on that land registry are all about. But what we're actually speaking about is the various tax that people, stamp duty that people actually sort of are paying. They're going to be paying more. Because of that, people are wanting to actually switch by the properties. Who wants to pay an extra £2,000 or £3,000 if it can be avoided? So there's a heck of a lot going on. So getting the right information, particularly sort of early on, is sort of quite important.
But it must be really hard, especially if you're in the first time buyer bracket. Admittedly, those are few and far between at the moment, but it must be very hard to know what questions you should be asking but haven't.
Well, there's been a massive great sort of questionnaires sort of which makes it very, very complicated. However, by doing the appropriate sort of collection of data from various different sources, we're working with some very canny experts at pulling out appropriate information, which is available. It is in the public domain, but it's knowing where to find it. And of course, some people sort of want to sell their property. They don't know where to get a lot of this particular sort of information. And it's trying to put the onus to a certain extent on estate agents as well. I mean, some of them are paying enormous sums of money to various people to get their properties out there and get their properties sort of seen.
Yes.
By working the right way, we've actually sort of found cutting their costs quite dramatically and making life much easier for them and the solicitors who are involved. I think it is worth mentioning, one of the challenges we have with the preferred route of conveyancing that goes on at the moment, which we can actually sort of call factory conveyancing or corporate conveyancing. Some people don't like the term factory, but it purely is that, because it's a numbers game there. And unfortunately, anything to do with a numbers game, if it's on a conveyor belt, it's got to come off again. And unfortunately, if there's no way of it moving forward, it just stacks up at the very end of the conveyor belt. I know, because I used to work in engineering, and we used to sort of manufacture sort of conveyor systems. So we want to try and move away from that scenario, that stuff isn't piling up, and sometimes even you get the wrong things twisted on the conveyor belt. You know what it's like when you're actually putting your shop in there. if somebody gets twisted, it holds everything up sort of behind it, and so you get a whole mess. And what we needed to do in engineering was try and stop the need for the emergency button to be pressed, because it stopped the whole thing, and the whole thing sort of fell over, and it's a loss of production because you can't get those pizzas out of the way or those sandwiches out of the way, whatever the conveyor belt was meant to be sort of moving along there, and you've got waste because these things that bounced into each other. Now exactly the same type of thing happens in conveyancing. You get all of these things bumping into each other. Now, unfortunately, because of the style of conveyors that's being used now compared to 25 years ago, some of them do not have the same level of sort of knowledge. Some of them are sort of fairly new, sort of coming in. And as a consequence, when these things, they don't know the quite, oh dear, what do I do in this particular situation?
Right.
They put in an inquiry, or they put in a query. So that's effectively like emergency button on conveyor belt stopped. Now, unfortunately, because of that, what happens with your particular piece that was on the conveyor belt that you were waiting? Unfortunately, because everything's sort of stopped, you have to wait. So it does add, the more queries you have, the more emergency buttons get pressed, if you like, or the more, it's not so much an emergency button, it's a stop button. It's a stop, you can't go forward for the moment, a bit like traffic lights. There you go. You're not going to have to wait now. And unfortunately, your sequence of change is going to take a rapid sort of period of time. It's a bit like, I mean, I was held up at the doctor's this morning. Drop in for your blood test. Well, I dropped in, and it wasn't so much a drop in, it was a sort of queue in, really. And I told them I'd arrived, but unfortunately, it took so much longer as a consequence, because there wasn't any sort of effective sort of system to cope with the number of people that there was. And it's a bit like we're speaking about the same thing in conveyancing, aren't we? You get this pile up because there's so much, and it's to do with the queries, because you can't tick all the boxes at the same time. So we have to try and find ways of actually taking the stress and the strain out of it. So if you're working with the right solicitors, that helps. The more experienced the solicitor, and of course, with systems we're working with, processes we're working with, is actually going to ensure that that happens as well. Getting the solicitors who can actually handle the queries. The other thing is, it did come in as a consequence. I noticed this particularly last week because I was directly involved with it. I had a query come back to me from another search provider, sort of saying, could I give some information on a certain challenge? And I said, well, yeah, I could. However, the solicitor should be doing that. They should actually be phoning up the council. If they phone up the council, but it won't be the council, it will be the county council. It's a unitary authority who they just speak to. Now, yes, I could have unraveled that. And if I was working directly with a solicitor, which many of IPSA members actually sort of do, we would take the time to unravel that, because we could actually do it, because this is what we're here to do, take the stress out. When you're working the conveyor system, when you're working that massive process, that heavy volume, you don't know who the heck you're working for. So because your time is spent working directly with people, you cannot actually, if you like, you don't know who you're speaking to. So you put that on one side and you work with the people that you know. Logic suggests that.
Yeah, well, you see, it's the shortest, it's the most obvious route, I guess.
But you need to know that route, don't you? But
well, if you don't know that route exists, then you're going to miss out on that opportunity immediately.
Well, you will. The other aspect is you will find out. You'll find that there are far few queries raised by those that actually choose to go down the IPSA searches route. Those that choose to get an IPSA member to do the work, because the information is refined and the information is more sort of direct. So even an inexperienced conveyancer should be, but they can't always. But even so, it does make it easier. Now, if you've got a better flow for the local authority information, and you have got more appropriate and direct information of that up front, what they call the material information, who owns the property, and is there other parking spaces and all sorts of things of that particular sort of nature. You want to know that. If you can't park your car outside your house, you're in stuck. And cottages next to where I live, they can't park their car outside. You would want to know that before you actually moved in. Where the next market. So get the right information and get it the right way.
So can I ask you just to tie up this podcast? Would you summarize the position, please?
Right. We've got the Law Society at the moment kicking cans down the road. And the can down the road, which they're kicking, unfortunately, although if you're doing it with a proper can, it gets misshapen. The can that the Law Society kicking down the road looks as though it's going to be exactly the same as the one they started with.
Right.
No any dents in it. Nothing will have changed in it, and they'll just come out with the same old sort of hoo-ha, which people are saying, well, hey, hang on, how can the poor old soul who's buying a property manage to actually fill in that sort of questionnaire? What we have is a way of they can actually do it more readily, an online thing, which will gather the majority of the information, and the information they require can be added. A lot of it through local authority searches, but other items actually will become more apparent, rather than the burdensome challenge that somebody's trying to sell a property, that trap they fall into. So what I'm actually trying to say, if you're working with an IPSA member, you've got a best opportunity, whether you're selling a property or whether you're buying a property, to get the appropriate refined information to able to take the pressure off. And if you like, one of the partnerships we're developing at the moment, the turnaround for conveyancing over an 18-month period of time, when it was stress tested, took no more than 8 weeks. Now you compare that with the average, where, if you like, we're speaking about some conveyancing work taking over half a year, never mind 8 weeks, which is less than just under 2 months. So you're in 6 months or 2 months, the choice is yours.
So you've heard it here first. There is potentially a better way of working than perhaps traditionally, and maybe the focus should always be on people who have got accurate local knowledge and were willing to take your searches to a more refined level. I think that refinement is the key word here. Until next time, thank you very much, Hamish McLay of Search Convey, and to all of you for watching. We do fly the flag every week for IPSA, and if any of you out there who are IPSA members, and I know some of you watch fairly regularly, would like to be on the show, you're more than welcome, and we can talk about stories from your own experience and also relate it to changes as they happen in the property world. But until next time, I wish you well. Try and keep your feet on the ground, but reach for those stars and do look after that mental health. And like me, try and look after your lurgies and get through them. Christmas is coming. Oh, take care. Bye-bye now.